You're listening to
Path of the Jedi.
with your host, Ronnie Cruz.
All right, welcome to Path of the Jedi, the podcast where Star Wars meets personal development. My name is Ronnie Cruz, your host for this riveting adventure. And riveting because that is exactly how my experience has been watching Obi-Wan Kenobi. Especially in the latest, well, not the latest, but the part that I will be covering today, part 3. Incredibly riveting. This is the first time, and this is not really too much of a spoiler because I think everybody knew that this was coming, but it happens particularly in this particular episode. It is the first time that we get an encounter between Obi-Wan and Darth Vader, or Anakin Skywalker, as Obi-Wan knew. This is the first time Obi is seeing Anakin in this form as Darth Vader. So incredibly riveting. I was on the edge of my chair. I was glued to the television the entire time. I mean, really, the entire thing thus far, at least up to part 3, has been an incredible ride for me. There's so much richness to it. I know I'm at the risk of sounding repetitive. There is so much color and depth and layers to this thing, even from like just the references that they make sometimes and the different Easter eggs. In part 3, they mention a character by the name of Quinlan Vos, who some of you might be familiar with if you watched the Clone Wars animated series, and if you've read the book Dark Disciples. Was it Dark Disciples? Yeah, I think it was Dark Disciples with Ventress. An amazing character, one of my favorite Jedi, because he's I don't know, well, you just have to get to know him. But they mention, Obi-Wan mentions him in this episode in part 3. So I don't know. I'm hoping that's a nod to getting a chance to actually meet Quinlan Vos in live action. And there are so many other nods throughout the entire show that if you have a long history like I do with Star Wars, it's so fun to catch those things. But at the same time, again, what's one of the beautiful things about the series and really all the new Star Wars media that's been coming out the last couple of years is that you don't need to have a long history with Star Wars to enjoy it, right? This is in my opinion, all the properties that have come out post Disney have been a great. If you're just getting introduced to Star Wars, they're a great introduction. They're a great foot into a grander universe, just like the prequels were for a certain generation, just like the animated series were for a certain generation. I think it's the same thing for this. If you're just brand new, no matter what generation or what age you are, if you're just brand new to Star Wars, there's so much that you can enjoy because it's just so well done. It's so well written, and it gives us podcasters so much to talk about. So for today, as I mentioned earlier, we will be discussing themes and topics from Obi-Wan Kenobi Part 3. There was, in particular, I wanted to talk about communication, right? Communication is incredibly important. And it was a theme that kept jumping out at me, actually all the way back from part 2 of Obi-Wan, and especially in part 3. So I just really wanted to hone in on it and cover this topic because, I mean, communication affects us all. It's something that we all do every day, whether we know it or not, whether we are purposeful with it or not. So that's what we're going to talk about. But before we jump in, here's a quick message. Hey guys, real quick message here. I want to let you know that I absolutely love doing Path of the Jedi, and I love that this is a source of motivation and inspiration and learning and growth for you. I do also want to let you know that at some point, your personal development journey and your growth journey has to be self-directed. That's why I wanted to tell you today about Growth You. It's an amazing company, well, really more of a community. I decided to partner up with them and actually got certified as an advisor because it's based on science, right? It's psychological principles that will help you make lasting changes in your life. They have a program called Daily Growth that I encourage each and every one of you to at least consider taking a look at. With Daily Growth, you get a positive daily focus in all areas of your life, daily motivation and healthy accountability, simple and relevant lessons for your life, and an opportunity to feed your best self. And best of all, it's absolutely free. Just go to pathofthejedi.com/resources and click on grow, and you can register for your own daily growth membership. Again, it's completely free, so you have nothing to lose. So if you're ready to live your best life, go to pathofthejedi.com/resources and click on grow. Okay, so communication. There's a lot for me that in Obi-Wan Kenobi parts 2 and part 3, parts 2 and 3, that's what I meant to say, that really kept pointing me towards this topic of communication, this theme of communication. Clearly with the interactions between Obi-Wan and Leia, and then you have the interactions between the Inquisitors, and then you have, the internal communication that's happening with Obi-Wan, right? And then, of course, the communication that you have with Obi-Wan and Darth Vader when they first meet in this particular episode, right? So there's lots of different layers here about communication that really I think we should dive into, because it's something that we all do, something that is, it's just a part of life, right? It's a part of life. It's a part of society. It's a part of culture. It's a part of being human. I studied communication in college, and I've really fallen in love with communication and its different aspects of how we communicate, the different aspects, the different mediums through which we communicate, and it's just such a fun topic for us in particular today. I really want to dive into the interpersonal communication as well as the intrapersonal communication, the communication that you have with yourself, because that's also very, very, very important. Now, there was a study done by a Dr. Merabian, or it might be Merabian. I apologize to the good doctor for not getting their name correct. I know I'm probably butchering it, but the study itself was very, very important. It's very eye-opening, and I think at this point, the findings of the study have been widely known and widely accepted. Widely known and widely accepted, not wildly. Sorry about that. Widely known and widely accepted. And the findings of this particular research states thus: 7% of communication is words, just the actual words. 38% of communication is vocal, so the tone of your voice and the ups and downs, the tonality of how you communicate. And up to 55% of your communication is visual, so body language and facial expressions and things like that. So it's pretty interesting find that up to, 93% of communication is nonverbal, right? And which really makes sense when you think about it. I mean, in terms of the age of our species, how long we've been around, and how long actually spoken and written language have been around, it makes sense that it's only 7%, at least the way I think about it, right? Knowing these stats about communication, I think, is really helpful for us individually to work on becoming more effective communicators. I mean, again, there's an unavoidable nature about interacting with other human beings, and so for those interactions to be as fluid and as clear and as productive as possible, we have to be really mindful of our communication. Sorry, I was about to say communicators. I'm all off today. We have to be really, really more mindful of our communication. And so knowing these stats, again, allows us to really be more effective and then therefore be more intentional and purposeful with our communication, right? Now, I think effective communication comes when all those three different categories, the words, the vocal and tone, and your visual communication, your facial expressions, and your body language, when all those things are in alignment, I think that makes for, if all those things are in alignment as much as possible, I think that makes for more effective communication. For example, when we're looking at the Inquisitors, right? The Inquisitors, these individuals, I mean, it's pretty clear their intention. It's pretty clear what they want to happen, right? And I always think about the Inquisitors and how they interact with each other as the worst kind of corporate job. I don't know. I've never had a corporate job, so that may not be fair. But I would wager to say that there are some work environments where people communicate like the Inquisitors communicate, because it's a very dog eat dog world. It's a very I have to get ahead by making sure that I step on other people. You know what I mean? Like, I know that has to exist somewhere, and the Inquisitors, they are really the worst example of that. It's a completely toxic work environment. However, they're very clear in their communication, right? Their body language, especially Fifth Brother, right? Like, he is very clear about the outcomes that he wants and what he's after and his goals, both with his words, all three, right? His words, the tone of his voice, and his body language. And even though, like, his voice is mostly raspy, you with his tonality and the sound of it, he really is very, very clear with his intention. And so I would say that the Inquisitors are all pretty good and effective communicators within their own world. Now, that's not to say that the different rank and file and the bureaucracy of it all, like, that definitely factors into how they communicate. Obviously, when it comes to rank and position, there's different communication amongst the Inquisitors, but overall, they are very, very clear, right? They're very, very clear with their message and their intent, and therefore, in my book, are very, very effective communicators. As a quick aside, I am still very much Team Riva. I love her. I love the character. I love Moses Ingram and her portrayal of Riva, because she's kind of stuck in this situation where, and I'm a firm believer of this, she's doing more than she's being asked for in her position, right? Like, she's going above and beyond, and I think that's just great work ethic, right? And in our context here on Earth, I think it's good practice, right? It's good practice. Obviously, however, there are situations and individuals that are threatened by these actions, by Riva's actions. But thankfully, we don't live in a world where people carry around real lightsabers, right? But yeah, I'm very much still Team Riva, even though that she is, again, living in this very, very toxic environment where she wants to excel, but everybody else, for the most part, is working to keep her in line, or worse, pretty much get rid of her, right? The other thing that I wanted to mention about Riva and why I love her is the complexity of Riva. I think it was at the end of part 2. Where she actually tells Obi-Wan that Anakin is still alive. And for me, like, this entire time, I was pretty certain that only a handful of people, if a handful of people, knew that Anakin was actually Darth Vader, right? In my own headcanon, the way I track it, really only Palpatine knows, and maybe Thrawn, because Thrawn is just that smart. But, like, there's no reason for anybody else within the Empire to know that Anakin Skywalker is now Darth Vader. And so the fact that Riva knows this, and maybe I missed something, guys, so feel free to fill me in on something some big piece that I might be missing. But Riva, there's more to Riva than she's letting on. There's more to Riva that we are going to discover as the show goes on. So again, I am very much a Team Riva. I love everything that I'm seeing, and hopefully there's some kind of redemption arc for her, because again, there's definitely more underneath everything that's happening. Which communication, right? Communication. I think part of Moses Ingram's portrayal and her performance really it colors the fact that, yes, Riva with the Inquisitors communicates very clearly her intention and what she's trying to accomplish, but underneath that, like, you can definitely tell that there's something else going on, right? And that there's something that she is withholding, and to portray that as an actor is very difficult, right? It's not an easy thing to do. To say one thing with your words and then to have something else communicated through, again, your eyes, your body language, your expression, all those nonverbal things. So again, kudos to Moses Ingram. Big fan of Riva. Now, continuing with this topic of communication and the statistics behind how much of it is verbal and how much of it is nonverbal, we are introduced towards the middle of the episode. We are introduced to a character by the name of Tala Durith, played by the wonderful Indira Varma, and a droid by the name of Ned B. Ned B, another noble droid in the long line of noble Star Wars droids. Now, when Tala Durith is introducing Ned B to Leia and Obi-Wan, she does mention that Ned B doesn't talk, right? He doesn't talk because as a droid, they don't allow him to talk. The Empire doesn't allow Ned B and his class of droids to talk because they're just manual labor. They're loader droids, so they carry and haul around big crates, heavy equipment, and things like that. Not allowed to talk, right? Leia's response to this, well, how do they communicate? How do we, how does he tell you what he wants or what he needs? And Tala Durith responds to that with, well, actions speak louder than words. If there's one character that really exemplifies this, it's Ned B. I mean, obviously, clearly, he can't communicate verbally. So all his communication does have to happen non-verbally. And what we see him do in this particular episode communicates volumes. It communicates volumes. What he's willing to do to help the cause, to help Obi-Wan, to help Leia get off the planet and escape. It's really exemplary and speaks volumes. Especially the fact that what he does sometimes at the risk of his own peril. So his actions speak massively, way more than perhaps his words could, and even if he could speak words, right? So that is, I think, Ned B. I love, and is a great example of these statistics that you can communicate so much more with nonverbal he doesn't even need verbal communication skills. Also, too, I think with Tala Durith, it's very telling that this is a mindset of hers, right? That actions speak louder than words, and I think there's some depth to that, and there's some reasoning behind why she says this, given especially her history with the Empire. Now, she was telling in this episode, she tells Obi-Wan that, at the beginning, she wanted to support and decided to work with the Empire because she thought they were going to bring her and the planet and perhaps her family the things that they promised to bring, right? Order, peace, stability. And she soon learned that their actions spoke otherwise, right? Their actions spoke otherwise. And clearly, the Empire was all about just stripping resources from different systems, and they didn't have the order and stability in mind as much as they did control and power and continued stripping of resources and growing the Empire for the sake of growing the Empire. So their actions were different, were not congruent with their words that they promised or that they were promising, or what Tala thought they were promising, right? And so that incongruence, that misalignment between verbal communication and the actual nonverbal communication, their actions, it's what led Tala Durith to be a turncoat and decide to then help the Jedi as opposed to working against them, right? As opposed to working with the Empire. So it makes perfect sense, given her history, why she believes that actions speak louder than words. And again, it lines up perfectly with everything that we've been talking about, that words only count for a very, very small percentage of our communication. Now, when you bring kids into the equation, it's a whole new ballgame, right? Like, kids, I think, are very naturally intuitive with nonverbal communication because they're not necessarily as well, they don't have the length of time in using verbal communication as, say, older adults, right? All right, so they have to rely more on the nonverbal stuff and those cues, and I think instinctively they naturally do that, right? I mean, before a child even utters a single word, they're able to read cues from the adults and the other people around them. I mean, again, it's a survival mechanism to be able to interact and communicate with the world and then read those cues. A child has to, be able to communicate that they're hungry or that they're thirsty or that, there's something that they need without even learning their first word, right? So I think, again, naturally, the younger you are, the more you have to rely on the nonverbal part of communication. And intuitively, you can tell when, I think as kids, we can tell when, again, there is a misalignment between what somebody is saying or not saying and what they are communicating nonverbally. Because, again, 90 up to 93% of your communication is nonverbal. We see this very, very clearly with the interaction between Leia and Obi-Wan, right? All the way back to part 2 of the show, right? She from the very beginning, when they first met, she was very aware that there were things that Obi-Wan was withholding from her, that he was not being upfront, that he wasn't being completely honest. In fact, in part 2, she actually says to him, "You think the less you say, the less you give away," when in fact, it's quite the opposite, right? Like she let him know that, hey, I know that you're holding something back from me, and she continues to call him out through part 3 as well, right? Because there's still things that Obi-Wan is not divulging to her, and of course, I'm sure he has good reasons, but she, as a child, has again that natural ability to sense when your verbal communication isn't in alignment with the rest of that 93% nonverbal communication, right? And again, whether or not, whatever the intention of Obi-Wan for withholding that information, I'm sure, he was, part of him was telling himself that it was for her own safety. But I think also too, it was him avoiding facing those truths, or maybe reliving some of those memories that he has around Leia and around Amidala and Anakin, of course, right? So there, I think, some still clearly some very unresolved issues that Obi-Wan has to deal with and has to face. And I think he's facing, as we move forward in the show. But clearly, the fact that he hasn't yet, up to this point, faced those, it communicates to, whether he knows it or not, whether it's conscious or not, whether it's purposeful or not, those things that he is unwilling to face are then things that he's unwilling to communicate with Leia. Right. And so again, there's a misalignment between the verbal and the nonverbal. Guys, it's such a fun topic, because when you see this, it just makes for so much subcontext behind why everybody is, number one, communicating the way they're communicating, and number two, what they're communicating through their actions. Because again, it's 93% nonverbal. We communicate 93% nonverbal, whether we're intentional or not, right? Like, there are things. Well, okay, so let me backtrack before I get into that. With these statistics, right? 7% verbal. What was it? 38% voice and tone, and then 55% nonverbal, which is like body language and facial expression. Like, when you see where communication breaks down the most in modern society, it's very, very telling of these statistics, right? Think about in your own life, what situations has started the most arguments? For me, and with my observation about other people who have come to me about arguments and conflicts they might have had with other people. One of the biggest sources of miscommunication and a breakdown in communication is because people were communicating in text, right? Right? Imagine, and this is why I don't like text. I send either voice messages or video messages, even better. But text are they're so empty, right? They're so devoid of all those other layers of information that we get from vocal cues and from facial expressions and body language cues, right? If it's just words on a screen, we have no idea the context, and sometimes we project our interpretations on the text that we're reading, and all kinds of miscommunication and arguments can start from that, right? So as much as possible, especially if there's something important. Now, don't get me wrong. I will send a message and a text, because it's efficient, it's quick. If it's nothing that is important, like that requires too much interpretation, right? If it's something important, if it's something that especially is personal or requires a little bit more nuance, then I'll at the very least send a voice message, right? There's plenty of apps that can do that, or you can just record a voice message. Most phones will allow you to record a voice message and send it through text. And then the next level after that is video text or video messages. I love doing that because I can show and communicate much more effectively and much more clearly when I have my entire face and my entire body and my voice communicating my message, and I can see the return message back, right? And so it makes communication much more smooth between two parties when you have all these when you're employing all the three different categories, right? The words being the least important, which is absolutely crazy. You think that words are important, and I guess as an observation, this is why authors, the most successful authors, are the ones that are really good. Are so successful because they're able to use just words to communicate very, very effectively. Or poets, right? Like think of some of your most favorite poets. They are amazing, and their ability, and they stand out. I mean, you have somebody like William Shakespeare, whose works stand the test of time because he's been able to really master just the words in order to communicate and convey the ideas and the emotions and the information, right? And so that is so hard though, right? I would hate to take as long, to take a whole day just to send a text to make sure I'm crafting it correctly, right? I don't want to have to write War and Peace to send somebody a text. I would rather just send them a voice message or a video message and have it be done with and be really clear and have effective communication right off the bat. So that's just really something to think about from an everyday communication. When you're talking about an in-person communication, one thing I want you guys to really be aware of, like with Obi-Wan, be careful of your subtext, right? Be careful of what's going on in your mind. Whether you know it or not, you're communicating that, right? Like however your mood is or whatever happens to be preoccupying you, those things are going to communicate whether you say them or not. Right? However, in whatever way you're feeling in a particular day, that's going to communicate to whoever you're interacting with. And so you got to be really, really mindful. You got to be really, really mindful of that, right? Be mindful of what you're bringing to the table mentally and emotionally, because that could potentially affect not only the communication, but then affect the other person's mood and outlook coming out of that communication, right? And then the last piece is obviously the communication with yourself, right? It's so important. What we affirm to ourselves, what we're saying about ourselves, is so incredibly important, guys. Because when we talk to ourselves, we're buying the entire story wholesale. There's one person that you believe 100% of the time, and that's you, right? Because communicating with yourself, you're communicating with yourself. You have the entire facility that you're using at 100%, and whatever you communicate to yourself, you will believe, right? And so it's so important that you communicate only the things that support you, only the things that you want to believe, only the good things about yourself, right? Don't punish yourself for things that you may have gotten wrong or that you may have messed up, because those things are passing. They are not necessarily things that are indicative of a permanent character flaw, right? Right? Nothing has to be permanent if you don't want it to be, right? Like the things that you might be punishing yourself with, you can let go. And the first step to letting go of those things is to is to cease that conversation with yourself, right? Stop being your worst bully, right? Instead of being your worst critic, be your best cheerleader, right? Again, the things that we communicate to ourselves, we will buy 100% wholesale. So you might as well communicate the things that you want to be, and affirm the things that you want to be, as opposed to affirming the things that you don't like. It just makes sense, right? And I would wager to say, I'm hoping that as the Obi-Wan Kenobi show progresses, I'm hoping that we see Obi-Wan start to shed these things that he's been carrying as a heavy burden on his life for the last 10 years, and really start to affirm his own greatness, right? Affirm his own power, affirm his worthiness, and affirm that those things that happened weren't his fault. Letting go of those guilty things, right? Those guilty feelings, those feelings of failure, right? Letting go of those things, well, I mean, obviously, I think he does. Once we see him in A New Hope, I think he's moved into really, like owning that strength and that power. And so I think it'll be, as the show goes on, it'll be an amazing example for us to follow, right? Letting go of those past things that we keep punishing ourselves for, and communicating only the good things, guys. I can't stress enough this importance, especially for those of you who tend to beat yourselves up, right? It's okay to mess up. To err is human, right? To err is human. And so, give yourself grace and start communicating to yourself in a very, very healthy way. And you'll be able to move forward and have a brighter experience as you go live your life day to day. All right, I think that is going to do it for today. I mean, communication, hopefully that was clear. It's very, very important, right? The interpersonal communication, the communication we have with one another, and being really, really mindful of your mental and emotional state going into any interaction, so that you can have more concise and purposeful and intentional communication, especially to make sure that you're not affecting the other person that you're communicating with, or the other people that you're communicating with, in a negative way, and making negative impact, right? Because I think we see that a lot, when people just completely lose control and reactively communicate. I mean, that's the worst case scenario, right? When people reactively communicate, then all hell breaks loose, right? And you make you can potentially make such a negative impact on the people around you. So being mindful, being present, being self-aware, so important when communicating, right? Being self-aware, aware of your own mental and emotional state when you're communicating with other people. And then obviously being self-aware as you're communicating with yourself, right? Like, really listen to the things that you're saying about yourself. Really listen to that conversation that you're having in your head, because I mean, it will inform you. Like I said, you'll believe and you'll buy everything that you say 100%, right? All right. So it's better, I think, to affirm all the good things that you want to be. Why not? I don't know. I think life is meant to be lived in a joyous state, and if we can do even more to make that a reality. I think. Okay, so let me back step here a little bit. I think we do more to ourselves to stopping that joy than we might be aware of, right? Than we might be aware of. We punish ourselves, I think, more than we acknowledge, and so growing that level of self-awareness will allow us to really be more supportive of ourselves, and again, be our own best cheerleaders. Yeah, so hopefully that makes sense, guys. Hopefully, this episode on communication was clear, because again, it's a huge part of life, right? We can't exist without it. So mastering it, or at least working to get better at it, I think is incredibly, incredibly important. That said, if you have anything to communicate to me about this episode or any other episode that you've listened to in the past, please, let's communicate. Hit me up on Twitter. It's at POTJ podcast. I'm still not as active on there as I used to be, or as I will be when once I finish watching Obi-Wan. But you can still hit me up there. I check it at least once a day and see if there's any messages or mentions. Or you can hit us up on Facebook. Right, you can find our page on Facebook. Again, it's POTJ podcast. I'm actually trying to do more there. As of late, I'm doing reels. I'm making quick videos like that and communicating with you guys. It's an easier, I think, platform for me. Because I can, record a video, right? Like it's that 100% communication using all three faculties. And I don't know, I might do some lives on there. I might do a live recording of an episode on there. So that'll be a great place for you to get more Path of the Jedi content. Again, it's POTJ podcast on Facebook. And then of course you can send an email if you want. You can leave me a message or even an MP3. Just send it over to send it over to info. That's it. I almost forgot my own email. Send it to info@pathofthejedi.com. Leave the title of the particular episode in the subject heading, and I would love to read your message on the next episode, or even play your MP3. Again, it's info@pathofthejedi.com. All right, so now it's time for the shout out. This week's shout out goes to my dear friend up in Pennsylvania, Miss Deb Fry. Deb Fry is amazing. She's up there in Lancaster, Pennsylvania, which, for me is always Lancaster because I'm from North Carolina. But up there it's Lancaster. And I wanted to give a shout out to Deb. I was up there this past weekend doing an event that she hosted, actually. She went above and beyond, just like we were talking about Reva, right? Except she's not a Sith. Deb is definitely a Jedi. She's just always gone above and beyond to be of service to people. And so I was already coming up there to Pennsylvania to do an event, and she volunteered to host a second event in her area in Lancaster, because she's, again, it's just exemplary of her character and her nature to want to help and serve people, right? And so she wanted to host an event there in Lancaster so that we can get this message of our company Yoli, the message of health, the message of wellness, transformation, emotional, physical, and even financial. She wanted to get that message and that purpose out to more people in her area, especially the people that she cares about the most. So she went out of her way, right? She bent over backwards to put on an amazing event in Lancaster. She had all the food prepared. It was a beautiful spread, delicious. I mean, she's a delicious cook anyway. She's an amazing chef. And so she had some snacks prepared, absolutely delicious. She had everything decorated beautifully. She had samples of our products. And again, she really went out of her way to serve and give people an event to plug into and to attend, all with the intention of helping them transform their lives for the better. So Deb, if there's, she I will say is the best among us, right? Her intention, her heart, and she communicates it all beautifully. Everything with her communication is in alignment with her character, with her purpose, and again, it's just exemplary. It's exemplary, and that's why I wanted to give her a shout out today. I don't even know if she actually listens to the show, but that's okay, because I want to celebrate her, the Force, the celebration that she feels from you guys through the Force. I know will lift her up, whether she knows it or not. So. This week we're going to celebrate and lift up Deb for being an amazing individual. Deb, if you happen to be listening out there, or if not, no big deal. Either way, this week's shout out goes to you. If you guys have anybody that you'd like to give a shout out to on the show, please, I would love to help you celebrate and lift up somebody. It might be somebody that you work with, it might be a family member, or it might be just somebody that you want to celebrate and shine light on, whoever that might be, right? You don't even have to know them to give a shout out to them, but let's hear it from you guys. I always want to celebrate and lift up people. If you have a shout out that you'd like to read, like me, to read on the show, please send that over to info@pathofthejedi.com with shout out in the subject heading. Write your message out on the email, or again, you can leave an MP3 and I would love to play that here on the show. Let's just keep celebrating each other, man. I know times have been challenging, and I think, like a little ray of light in everybody's day will help, right? Will help. So again, if you want to give a shout out to anybody here on the show, I would love to do it for you. Send that shout out to info@pathofthejedi.com with shout out in the subject heading. All right, well, that's going to do it for real this time. The shows, I think, are getting longer and longer since I started recording here on this format. Again, it's less edited, it's less chopped up, it's more raw and off the cuff, but I don't know, I like this format. It's definitely easier for me. The previous format that I was recording on with computer and the studio mic and everything, I mean, that was taking me up to 8 hours of production time just for one, like 20-minute episode. And now, these 35 minute episodes are taking me only an hour to make. So definitely preferred method of producing. So you'll get more of me, right? You'll get more of me. It's longer episodes, but I think they're just as fun. The content, hopefully, I believe they're just as good, but hopefully they're just as good for you as well. Anyways, more to come from me, guys. Obviously, we'll have a fresh new episode next week. We're going to cover Obi-Wan Kenobi, the next part 4. And then beyond that, we're going to finish out Obi-Wan until it's done. And then I have a lot of great ideas for future episodes. I want to cover, the topic of androids, right? Droids in Star Wars. I think that needs to be a conversation we have here on Path of the Jedi. I also want to talk about the Chosen One, right? The Chosen One. I listened to a colleague podcast of mine, Bright Suns podcast, and they discussed who they believe is the Chosen One in Star Wars, and it was an incredibly enlightening and very elegant explanation of their theory, or not theory, who they believe is the Chosen One. So I recommend you guys checking out the Bright Suns podcast wherever podcasts are available. Their latest episode that I listened to talked about the Chosen One. So that's another idea and topic that I definitely want to cover. Because that's lots of meat to dive into, to dig into. I don't know what the saying is. Anyways, I've yammered on long enough, guys. Thanks for tuning in today. I really appreciate you spending time with me on this episode. We will catch you again next week with a fresh new episode. So until then, be well, be safe, and may the Force be with you.